Subscribe to Cheating Tales Lab. Now let's begin. Keith Riggs had been counting down the days for 6 months. The transport from Kuwait touched down at Fort Campbell 3 hours before sunrise, and he'd already filed his discharge papers. The Army had been his life for 12 years, but Garrett was 9 now, and Keith had missed too many birthdays, too many school plays, too many moments that didn't come back. Charlotte had been understanding at first, then distant, then gone. The divorce papers arrived while he was in Kandahar. He'd signed them without a lawyer, without a fight. She got the house in Tennessee, full custody, and he got video calls every Sunday that Garrett showed up for less and less. The plan was simple: surprise Garrett 5 days early, take him fishing at Dale Hollow Lake like they used to, maybe start making up for lost time. Keith drove his old Silverado through the pre-dawn darkness, watching familiar roads unspool in his headlights. The house, his old house, sat dark on Miller Road. He pulled into the driveway and killed the engine. The silence felt wrong. He knocked first, then used his old key. It didn't work. The locks had been changed. He walked around back, peered through windows. The furniture was different. Wrong. He was standing in the backyard, a cold April rain starting to fall, when he heard Mrs. Patterson's porch light click on next door. "Keith, that you?" The elderly woman wrapped her housecoat tighter. "Lord, Charlotte didn't tell you." "Tell me what?" "She moved out about 2 months back. Got remarried quick, some man she met at her work. Damon something. They're living at his place now, out past Cedar Hill." Keith felt something cold settle in his chest. "She remarried? That fast?" "Seemed fast to me too, honey. But who am I to judge?" Mrs. Patterson's face softened. "That poor boy, though. Garrett. I saw him a few times before they moved. Quiet as a church mouse. Had bruises on his arms once, but Charlotte said he'd fallen off his bike." Keith's hands curled into fists. "What's the address?" She gave it to him, watched him drive away with worried eyes. The Cannon property sat 15 miles outside town, down a gravel road that turned to mud in the rain. Keith drove past it twice, studying. A farmhouse, barn, couple of outbuildings. One truck in the driveway. Lights on in the main house. It was nearly midnight now. He parked a quarter-mile down the road and walked back through the rain. The front door was locked. He could hear music playing inside, loud enough to cover his footsteps as he circled the house. Through a window, he saw Charlotte on a couch, wine glass in hand, laughing at something on TV. A large man sat beside her, thick-necked, heavy-shouldered, the kind of size that came from lifting weights in prison yards, not gyms. Damon Cannon. Keith's training kicked in automatically. Assess, plan, execute. But where was Garrett? He moved toward the barn, and that's when he saw him. His son, kneeling in the mud behind the house. Hands tied behind his back with yellow nylon rope. Head bowed, soaked through, shaking. Keith ran. His boots splashed through puddles. Garrett's head jerked up, eyes wide with terror that melted into disbelief. "Dad, I've got you." Keith's fingers worked the knots, rage making his hands shake. "I've got you, buddy. You're okay now. Dad, you can't be here." Garrett's voice was a broken whisper. He said bad boys pray outside until God forgives them. "I've been here since after school. I didn't mean to drop the plate, I swear." "How long, Garrett?" "I don't 9 hours? Maybe. 9 hours. In the rain. Hands tied. 9 years old." Keith lifted his son. Garrett couldn't stand, his legs buckled. Keith caught him, felt how light he was, how thin. He carried him toward the Silverado, but Garrett grabbed his shirt with numb fingers. "Daddy, don't go in the barn. Please, don't." From inside the barn came sounds. Whimpering. Not animal. Keith set Garrett in the truck, turned the heat on full blast, locked the doors. "Stay here. Don't come out no matter what you hear." "Dad, I'll be right back." The barn door wasn't locked. Keith pulled it open. The smell hit him first. Unwashed bodies, fear, waste. His eyes adjusted to the dim light from a single bulb. 3 cages. Chain-link dog crates, the kind meant for Rottweilers. Inside them, 2 girls, maybe 12 and 14, and a boy around 16. Filthy. Terrified. Chained. The younger girl started crying when she saw him. "Please, we'll be good. We'll be quiet. Please don't. I'm not him." Keith's voice came out steady despite the fury building in his chest. "I'm getting you out." He found bolt cutters on a workbench, cut the chains. The kids were wearing rags, covered in bruises and cigarette burns. They flinched when he reached for them. "Can you walk?" He kept his voice gentle. The boy nodded. Help the girls up. Their legs shook. There's a truck out front. Silver Silverado. My son's inside. I need you to get in the back seat and... The barn door swung open behind him. Damon Cannon stood backlit in the doorway, holding a tire iron. He was bigger than Keith had thought, 6'4" and 260 easy. His smile showed teeth gone bad. Well now, Charlotte said her ex was deployed. Guess she was wrong. His eyes went to the kids, then back to Keith. You're making a real big mistake, soldier boy. Keith positioned himself between Cannon and the kids. Only mistake is yours. Let them go. Cannon laughed, a wet, phlegmy sound. Let them go? These are mine. Cost me good money, most of them. That boy there. His mama owed me $3 grand. Girl's daddy bet her in a poker game. You think anybody's looking for them? You think anybody cares? I care. You care? Cannon stepped forward, rolling the tire iron in his hand. You don't even care about your own kid. Charlotte told me all about you. Always deployed, never home. That boy needed a father. I stepped up. You tied him up in the rain. Discipline. Something you wouldn't know about, being gone all the time. Cannon's smile widened. But hey, since you're here, maybe we can work something out. I'll keep your boy. You take these 3. We call it even. Walk away, soldier. This don't concern you. Keith looked at the man who'd put his hands on his son, who kept children in cages, who stood there grinning like he'd won. Here's what's going to happen, Keith said quietly. You're going to stand there. Not move. Those kids are walking out. I'm calling the police. And you're going to prison for a very long time. Cannon rushed him. Keith had been in combat in Fallujah, Kandahar, Mosul. He'd trained in Krav Maga, combatives, room clearing. Damon Cannon was big and mean, but he was slow, and he'd never faced someone who'd survived IED ambushes and house-to-house fighting. The tire iron swung. Keith stepped inside the arc, drove his elbow into Cannon's throat, followed with a knee to the solar plexus. Cannon went down gagging. Keith kicked the weapon away, zip-tied Cannon's hands behind his back with the same yellow rope that had bound his son. The kid stared. Go to the truck, Keith said. Now. They ran. Keith dragged Cannon outside, dumped him in the mud where Garrett had been. He walked to the house, kicked the door open. Charlotte looked up from the couch, wine glass frozen halfway to her lips. She saw her ex-husband, covered in mud and rain, and the color drained from her face. Keith, where's your phone? What are you? Your phone. Now. She handed it over. He dialed 911, kept his eyes on her the whole time. I need police and ambulances at 4158 Cedar Hill Road. Multiple minors in distress. Suspect restrained. Name's Damon Cannon. Send everyone. He ended the call. Charlotte was crying now, mascara running. I didn't know, she said. I didn't know about the kids in the barn. I swear, Keith, you knew about Garrett. Her mouth opened. Closed. He said. Damon said discipline was important. That boys need structure. I thought. You thought tying our son up outside for 9 hours in the rain was structure? He said it was only for an hour. He said, you chose him. Keith's voice was ice. You chose a man you barely knew over our son. You saw the bruises. You knew something was wrong. And you did nothing. Sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer. Keith walked out, got in his truck. Garrett was in the back seat with the 3 kids, his arms around the youngest girl, whispering that it was okay. They were safe now, his dad was here. For the first time in 6 months, Keith felt like maybe he'd come home just in time. But as the police lights painted the farmhouse red and blue, and he watched officers swarm the property, Keith Riggs knew this was just the beginning. Because men like Damon Cannon didn't work alone. And Keith had a feeling this rabbit hole went deeper than one barn in Tennessee. The DeKalb County Sheriff's Office interview room smelled like burnt coffee and industrial cleaner. Keith sat across from Detective Ron Mackey, a man in his 50s with tired eyes and a face that had seen too much. Garrett was with a social worker 3 doors down. The 3 kids from the barn were at the hospital. You did good tonight, Mr. Riggs, Mackey said, sliding a styrofoam cup of coffee across the table. Those kids, we've been looking for 2 of them for 8 months. Runaway reports went nowhere. No one ever thought to look at Cannon's place. What about Charlotte? Mackey's expression hardened. Your ex-wife is claiming ignorance. Says she didn't know about the barn. We're holding her for child endangerment at minimum, based on what Garrett told the social worker. But between you and me, he leaned forward. I think she knew more than she's saying. Keith's jaw tightened. What happens to Garrett? CPS is involved. Given that you're the father and you've got no record, they're expediting emergency custody. You'll have him by morning. But Keith, Mackey's voice dropped. We need your help. With what? Damon Cannon's not talking. Lawyered up immediately. But in the barn, we found records. Names, dates, payments. This wasn't just him. There's a network. People buying and selling kids like cattle. We've identified at least 7 more missing children who might be connected. Keith felt his blood run cold. You're saying there are more? We're saying this is bigger than we thought. Cannon's phone records show calls to a dozen different numbers across 3 states. Cash payments logged in a ledger. We found a burner laptop with encrypted files we haven't cracked yet. Mackey pulled out a photo, slid it across the table. Recognize this man. Keith studied the image. A man in his 40s, silver hair, expensive suit. He was standing next to Damon Cannon at what looked like a farm auction. Never seen him. That's Terrence Grant. Real estate developer in Nashville. Clean record. Donates to children's charities, sits on nonprofit boards. But his number's in Cannon's phone 37 times in the last 2 months. Mackey pulled out another photo. This woman, blonde, mid-30s, hard eyes. No. Hope Thayer. Runs a youth outreach program in Clarksville. We're getting warrants, but these people have money, connections, lawyers. They'll walk if we don't build an airtight case. Keith looked at the photos spread across the table. A web of faces, numbers, connections. Children's lives reduced to transactions. What do you need from me? Mackey sat back. Officially? Nothing. You're a victim in this. Your son's a victim. You go home. You take care of your boy. You let us handle it. He paused. Unofficially? I've been working child crimes for 20 years. I've watched men like Grant walk away because they're smart enough to keep 3 layers between themselves and the dirty work. I've watched kids disappear into systems that don't care. And I'm tired of it. You're asking me to do something illegal. I'm saying you've got skills the Army taught you. You know how to gather intelligence. You know how to survive in hostile territory. And you've got motivation that my badge and pension don't give me. Mackey leaned forward. These people took your son. They hurt him. And they're hurting dozens of others. Maybe hundreds. The law will do what it can. But sometimes the law isn't enough. Keith thought about Garrett's thin frame, the rope marks on his wrists, the way he'd flinched when Keith touched him. He thought about the girl in the cage, begging not to be hurt. If I find something, Keith said carefully, how would I get it to you? Mackey slid a business card across the table. A personal cell number was written on the back. Hypothetically, you'd call that number. Evidence gathered through irregular channels has a way of pointing us toward legal methods of confirmation. We find what we need to find. These people go away forever. Keith pocketed the card. Hypothetically. Mackey stood, extended his hand. Go be with your son, Keith. He needs you. Everything else can wait. But as Keith walked out of the station into the gray dawn, he knew everything else couldn't wait. Somewhere out there, more children were in cages. And the people responsible were already covering their tracks. He picked up Garrett from CPS at 6 a.m. His son fell asleep in the truck before they made it 5 miles, his head against the window. Keith drove to a motel on the edge of town, carried Garrett inside, laid him on the bed, and sat watching him sleep. At 8 a.m., his phone buzzed. A text from a number he didn't recognize. Charlotte made bail. She's asking to see Garrett. We can't stop her legally. Be careful. RM. Keith deleted the text, looked at his sleeping son. Then he pulled out his laptop and started researching Terrence Grant. The most dangerous missions, he'd learned in the Army, weren't the loud ones. They were the ones where you moved quiet, gathered intelligence, and struck before the enemy knew you were there. These people had made the mistake of thinking he was just a grieving father. They were about to learn different. 3 days later, Keith sat in a parking lot across from Grant Development Corporation's Nashville headquarters, watching employees filter in for the workday. He'd spent 72 hours learning everything about Terrence Grant. Divorced 5 years ago, no kids, owned properties across Tennessee and Kentucky, served on boards for Children's Hope Foundation and Safe Haven Youth Services. The perfect philanthropist. Except Safe Haven's Clarksville location was run by Hope Thayer. And Children's Hope Foundation's largest donor was a shell corporation that traced back to an LLC that owned the property where Damon Cannon's barn stood. Keith had learned how to track money in the Army, working with intelligence analysts in Baghdad. It wasn't hard if you knew where to look. What was hard was finding proof that would stand up in court. His phone buzzed. Detective Mackey. We got Cannon's laptop decrypted, the detective said without preamble. Keith, it's worse than we thought. Option lists. Buyer information. We've identified 12 children currently missing. But here's the thing. The encryption was military grade. Professional. Cannon couldn't have set this up himself. Grant. Maybe. Or someone above him. The ledger from the barn shows payments going up to a TG, but they're structured to look like legitimate real estate transactions. Without catching someone in the act or getting one of them to flip, we've got circumstantial evidence at best. Keith watched a silver Mercedes pull into the executive parking spot. Terrence Grant stepped out, 53 years old, $2,000 suit, smile for the security guard. What about Charlotte? Keith asked. DA offered her a deal. Full cooperation in exchange for reduced charges. She gave up everything she knows about Cannon, but she swears she never knew about the network. Says she thought he was just strict with kids. She's useless to us. She knew, Keith said flatly. She knew and she didn't care. Probably. But proving she was complicit in trafficking? That's different than proving neglect. She'll do time for what happened to Garrett, but not much. Mackey sighed. I'm sorry, Keith. I know that's not what you want to hear. Keith ended the call. Watched Grant disappear into his building. That night, he hired a babysitter he'd vetted 3 times over, a retired schoolteacher Mrs. Patterson recommended, and drove to Clarksville. Safe Haven Youth Services operated out of a converted church on the edge of town. The sign out front promised hope and healing for at-risk youth. Keith parked down the street, watched. At 9 p.m., Hope Thayer emerged with a teenage boy. She guided him to her car, a white Lexus, with a hand on his shoulder that looked maternal unless you noticed how her fingers dug into his collar. Keith followed them to a warehouse district near the river. The Lexus pulled into a loading bay. Keith parked and moved on foot, staying in shadows. Through a grimy window, he saw the boy handed off to a man in a truck. Money changed hands. The boy was driven away. Keith photographed everything with his phone. Plates, faces, transaction. Then he called Mackey's personal number. I've got Hope Thayer making a handoff. Warehouse at 412 River Industrial. Just happened 10 minutes ago. Can you stay on her? Already am. Keith, be careful. If she spots you. She won't. Hope drove back to Safe Haven, locked up, went home to an apartment complex in a nice part of town. Keith sat in his truck until 2 a.m., compiling everything he'd seen. Then he drove to Garrett. His son was asleep in the motel room, curled around a stuffed bear Keith had bought him. The babysitter reported no problems. Keith paid her double, locked the door, and lay down next to his boy. Dad. Garrett's voice was small in the darkness. Yeah, buddy. Are they going to take me away? The CPS lady said. She said I might have to go to a foster home until everything is sorted. Keith pulled his son closer. No one's taking you anywhere. I've got emergency custody. You're with me now. But Mom, your mom made choices. Bad ones. She's dealing with consequences. Keith smoothed Garrett's hair. I'm sorry I wasn't here before. I'm sorry I didn't protect you. You came back, Garrett whispered. You came back early. Always will. No matter what. Garrett was quiet for a moment. Then, what you did to Damon, in the barn. You hurt him. I stopped him from hurting you. From hurting those other kids. The police lady asked me questions. About what he did. About Mom. Garrett's voice cracked. I told her everything. Is that why Mom's in trouble? You told the truth. That's all you ever have to do. The rest is on adults who should have protected you. Garrett rolled over, looked at his father in the dim light from the window. There were other kids at Safe Haven. Before, Damon would bring them over sometimes. He'd say they were going to better homes. But they looked scared, Dad. Like those kids in the barn. Keith's blood went cold. Did you tell the police this? I didn't remember until now. Everything's been so. Garrett's breath hitched. I just want it to be over. It will be. Keith made a promise he wasn't sure he could keep. I'll make sure of it. The next morning, he called Detective Mackey with Garrett's new information. Then he started planning. Because if Hope Thayer was moving kids out of Safe Haven and Terrence Grant was funding it, there had to be more people involved. Drivers. Buyers. A whole infrastructure. Keith had fought insurgent networks in Iraq. He knew how cells operated. Compartmentalized, careful, paranoid. You couldn't just cut off the head. You had to burn the whole thing down. He opened his laptop, pulled up property records for Grant Development Corporation, started mapping locations, looking for patterns. Warehouses, rural properties, abandoned buildings. His phone rang. Unknown number. Mr. Riggs? A woman's voice, professional. This isn't Pope. I'm an attorney representing Charlotte Banks. She'd like to arrange a meeting with you regarding Garrett's custody. She signed away her rights. Actually, she signed under duress. We're filing to have the divorce decree revisited, along with custody arrangements. Given your recent altercation with Mr. Cannon, we believe a court will question your stability as a custodial parent. Keith's hand tightened on the phone. She tied our son up outside in the rain. She says you're making false allegations to alienate her from her child. She's prepared to fight for joint custody at minimum. We'll be in touch with a court date. The line went dead. Keith sat in stunned silence. Then he called Mackie. They're going after my custody, using the barn against me, saying I'm violent. That's not going to fly, Keith. Garrett's testimony alone. But it'll tie me up in court. Keep me from focusing on finding the others. Keith's jaw clenched. That's the point, isn't it? Charlotte doesn't want Garrett back. Someone's using her to slow me down. Grant. Has to be. He knows I'm looking. He's circling wagons. Mackie was quiet. Then, the warrant we executed on Safe Haven came back clean. Too clean. Hard drives wiped. Records shredded. Hope Thayer's lawyer says she runs a legitimate nonprofit, and any allegations are slanderous. Without catching her in the act again, we've got nothing. I caught her in the act. I gave you photos. Photos that show her with a teenage boy and another man. Her lawyer says the boy was a volunteer. The man was a donor picking up supplies. We can't prove otherwise without the kid's testimony, and we can't find the kid. Keith felt walls closing in. They were good. These people were professional, connected, and they knew how to cover tracks. Keith, Mackie said carefully, sometimes you have to let the system work. The system's failing. Then make it work better. Find me something airtight. Something even their lawyers can't spin. Keith ended the call. Looked at Garrett, playing on the motel room floor with toy soldiers Keith had bought. His son had lost weight, flinched at loud noises, woke up screaming 3 times a night. The people who did this were still free. Still hunting. Keith Riggs had spent 12 years following orders, trusting the system, believing justice worked. That ended now. He opened his laptop, pulled up the dark web forums he'd learned to navigate in military intelligence. Started looking for people who specialized in information that courts couldn't use, but fathers could. By nightfall, he had 3 names. By midnight, he'd made contact with someone who called himself Pablo Skinner and claimed to be able to access any server in Tennessee. What do you need? Pablo asked through encrypted chat. Keith typed, everything on Terrence Grant, Hope Thayer, and anyone connected to Safe Haven Youth Services. Financial records, communications, property holdings. Everything. That's a big job. What's it worth to you? Keith thought about the number in his bank account. Deployment savings. Money he'd been setting aside for Garrett's college. Name your price. $10,000. Half up front. Results in 48 hours. Keith wired the money. Then he took Garrett to the one place he knew they'd be safe. His mother's house in Cookville, 2 hours away. Dorothy Riggs was 71, tough as nails, and still shot skeet every Sunday. She took one look at her son and grandson and asked no questions. How long, she asked. Maybe a week. Maybe longer. She looked at Garrett, saw the fear in his eyes, the way he stayed close to Keith. Her face hardened. You do what you need to do, she said quietly. We'll be fine here. Keith hugged his son, promised he'd call every day, and drove back to Nashville. He had 48 hours to prepare. And when Pablo Skinner delivered what he'd paid for, Keith Riggs was going to war. The kind of war the Army never trained him for. The kind where rules didn't matter and casualties were acceptable. Because his son deserved justice. And Keith was going to make sure he got it. Pablo Skinner delivered at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday. The files arrived via encrypted upload. 847 documents, for years of emails, bank records showing payments to 17 different individuals, property deeds, and security footage from Safe Haven servers before they were wiped. Keith sat in a Waffle House parking lot, downloading everything to an external hard drive. What he found made his hands shake. Terrence Grant wasn't just connected to the trafficking network. He'd built it. The shell corporations were elaborate, layers of LLCs and trusts that led back to Grant development. Properties purchased at below-market rates, held for 6 months, then sold to another Grant entity. Clean on paper. Except the properties were never renovated. They sat empty. Until they weren't. Security footage from Safe Haven showed Hope Thayer bringing children in through a back entrance after hours. Not the at-risk youth advertised. Younger, quieter, kids who looked like they'd given up fighting. The emails were worse. Coded language, packages, deliveries, premium merchandise. But there were slip-ups. One email from Grant to Hope. The client wants a girl this time. 10 to 12, brunette preferred. Can you source locally, or do we need to import? Hope's response. Local is risky after the Canon situation. I'll reach out to our supplier in Memphis. The Memphis supplier was listed in the financial records as Leroy Bell. Keith cross-referenced the name, found a man with 3 prior arrests for child endangerment, all pled down. He ran a homeless shelter in Memphis. The network was clear now. Bell sourced vulnerable kids. Hope moved them through Safe Haven. Grant financed it and connected buyers. Damon Cannon had been what? A buyer? A storage facility? Keith kept digging. Found more names. Sammy Ingram, a trucking company owner whose routes matched the property locations. Carl Kelly, a family court judge in Nashville who'd been paid $50,000 through a consulting contract 3 weeks before ruling on a case that sent a 13-year-old girl to a group home run by Safe Haven. A judge. They bought a judge. Keith's phone rang. Mackey. Charlotte's attorney withdrew the custody filing, the detective said. Came out of nowhere. Her lawyer said she's decided to accept the current arrangement. That's not suspicious at all. It gets better. Charlotte checked herself into a rehab facility this morning. Voluntary commitment. Her lawyer says she's dealing with trauma and substance issues. Needs to focus on recovery. Someone paid her off. Or scared her. Either way, she's out of your hair for now. Mackey paused. We executed the warrant on Hope Thayer's apartment. Found nothing. I mean nothing, Keith. It's like she scrubbed the place. No computer, no files, barely any personal effects. She's running. Keith looked at the surveillance footage on his screen, frozen on Hope's face as she led a child into Safe Haven's basement. I've got something for you, Keith said. What kind of something? The kind you can't ask me where I got it. Mackey was silent. Then, I'm at the station. Come in the back entrance. 4 a.m. No cameras that direction this week. Keith handed over a USB drive with half the files. Enough to get warrants, start arrests, dismantle the network. He kept the rest for insurance. Mackey reviewed the footage, read the emails, looked at the financial records. His face went pale. This is, Jesus, Keith. This is federal. FBI, Homeland Security. This is RICO-level organized crime. Can you use it? Not directly. Chain of custody is non-existent. But I can use it to know where to look. We get warrants for the properties, the bank records. We lean on the small fish until someone flips. Carl Kelly, the judge. If we can prove he was paid to place kids with Safe Haven, he's facing 20 years minimum. He'll deal. What about Grant? Mackey met his eyes. Men like Grant have lawyers that could get God acquitted. Even with this, he'll claim ignorance. Say his businesses were misused without his knowledge. Blame subordinates. Best case, we get him on tax evasion or fraud. He might do 5 years in a white-collar prison. That's not justice. That's the law. Keith stood. Then the law's not enough. Keith, Mackey's voice hardened. Don't do anything stupid. I'm giving you a pass because you saved those kids. Because you're a victim. But if you cross certain lines, I can't protect you. Didn't ask you to. Keith walked out, drove to a 24-hour diner, ordered coffee he didn't drink. The files were still uploading to 3 different cloud servers, backed up and encrypted. Evidence preserved. But Mackey was right. Grant would walk. Maybe not today, maybe not next year, but men with money always walked. The system was designed that way. Keith had been thinking like a soldier. Gather intelligence, strike the target, mission complete. He needed to think like something else. His phone buzzed. Text from a blocked number. I know who you are. I know what you found. We should talk. TG. Keith stared at the message. Terrence Grant had his number, which meant Grant knew he was a threat. Another message. Tomorrow, 2 p.m., Montgomery Bell Park, main lot. Come alone. Or don't. And we release everything we have on your son's mother. Did you know Charlotte had a drug problem? That she left Garrett alone for days at a time? Imagine what a court would do with that information. Keith's blood ran cold. They were threatening to destroy Charlotte's credibility, which would destroy Garrett's testimony, which would collapse the entire case. He typed back, I'll be there. The response came immediately. Smart man. This doesn't have to be difficult, Keith. You want your son safe. I want my business protected. We can both get what we want. Keith deleted the messages. Sat in the diner as dawn broke over Nashville. Terrence Grant had just made his first mistake. He'd given Keith a time and place. And Keith Riggs knew how to plan an ambush. Montgomery Bell Park was 3,700 acres of woods and trails an hour west of Nashville. Keith arrived at 11 a.m., 3 hours early. He parked at a trailhead 2 miles from the main lot, changed into hiking gear, and moved through the forest on foot. Military training. Survey the terrain, identify choke points, establish fallback positions. The main parking lot sat at the end of a single-lane road with forest on 3 sides. 2 exits, the road in, or a hiking trail that led deeper into the park. Keith set up on a ridge overlooking the lot, settled behind a tree with binoculars. At 1:30 p.m., 2 black SUVs arrived. Terrence Grant stepped out of one, flanked by 2 men who moved like private security. The other SUV held 3 more men, all armed, shoulder holsters visible under jackets. Grant was taking this seriously. At 1:55 p.m., Keith descended from the ridge, approached from the trail, hands visible. The security team tensed, hands moving to weapons. "Relax," Grant called out. He smiled, extending a hand. "Keith Riggs. Finally. I was beginning to think you'd stand me up." Keith didn't shake his hand. "What do you want?" "Straight to business." "I respect that." Grant gestured to a picnic table. "Let's sit. We're civilized people." Keith sat across from him. The security team formed a perimeter 10 feet back. Grant leaned forward, expression friendly. "You've been busy. Breaking into servers, tracking my business, feeding information to the police. Impressive work. Military intelligence, I assume?" "Get to the point." "The point is you're chasing ghosts, Keith. Safe Haven is a legitimate nonprofit. My real estate investments are legal. Whatever Damon Cannon was doing on his property, that's on him. I'm a philanthropist. Ask anyone. I've seen the emails. Emails can be faked, doctored, taken out of context." Grant's smile didn't waver. "You know what courts care about? Provable facts. Chain of custody. Evidence that stands up to legal scrutiny. You have none of that. Detective Mackey does. Detective Mackey has circumstantial evidence that my lawyers will tear apart in 5 minutes." Grant's voice hardened. "But here's what you do have. A son who needs his father. A boy who's been through hell. Don't you think Garrett deserves a normal life? Stability. Don't say my son's name. I'm trying to help, Keith. You walk away. Stop digging. And I make sure Charlotte's testimony supports your custody case. I make sure Garrett's records stay sealed. I make sure your family is protected." Grant paused. "Or you keep pushing, and I bury Charlotte so deep that every piece of Garrett's testimony becomes suspect. I tie you up in court for years. By the time it's done, your son will be 18 and damaged beyond repair." Keith studied the man across from him. Calm, confident, utterly convinced he'd won. "You're forgetting something," Keith said. "What's that?" "I didn't come here to negotiate." Grant's smile faded. "Then why did you come?" "To see if you'd bring friends." Keith pulled out his phone, pressed send on a pre-written text. In the distance, sirens wailed. Grant's face went pale. "What did you do?" "I told Detective Mackey I was meeting you here. Told him you'd threaten my son. Told him you'd have armed men." Keith stood. "Those security guys? Concealed carry permits don't cover hired muscle making threats in a state park. That's felony menacing. And when they search your vehicles, which they're legally allowed to do after a weapons complaint, what do you think they'll find?" One of the security team members broke and ran. 2 others reached for their weapons. Keith dove behind the picnic table as 3 sheriff's cruisers screamed into the lot, lights blazing. On the ground. Hands where we can see them. It was chaos. Security team trying to comply, Grant screaming about lawyers, Keith staying down as deputies swarmed the scene. But the real play wasn't here. While Grant was being detained, while his security was being searched and arrested, Detective Mackey was executing warrants on Grant Development Corporation's headquarters, on Hope Thayer's storage units, on Leroy Bell's Memphis shelter. Synchronized raids. 15 locations. Based on the information Keith had provided. By the time Grant made bail 6 hours later, the FBI had already seized his servers. Found the deleted files Pablo Skinner had pulled. Found the financial records that proved the shell corporations. Found the pattern of property purchases that aligned with missing children reports. Keith watched it unfold from Mackey's office, drinking terrible coffee. Judge Kelly flipped, Mackie said, hanging up his phone. Soon as we showed him the payment records, he gave up everything. Hope Thayer's in the wind, but we've got a bolo out. Leroy Bell's in custody. Sammy Ingram's talking to save himself. And Grant. Mackie's expression was grim. His lawyers are already filing motions. But the FBI's involved now. This is human trafficking, RICO, tax fraud. Even with his connections, he's looking at decades. Maybe life. Keith nodded slowly. Felt the weight of 3 days lift slightly off his shoulders. Go home to your son, Mackie said. This part's over. But Keith knew it wasn't. Not really. Because Hope Thayer was still out there. And there were still 12 missing children they hadn't found. He drove to Cookeville, picked up Garrett, held his son tight. Is it done? Garrett asked. It's done, Keith lied. Because the truth was harder. Justice was messy, incomplete, and sometimes you had to settle for good enough. But Keith Riggs was a soldier. And soldiers knew sometimes battles end, but wars continue. For now, though, his son needed him. So he went home. 2 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning, Keith was making breakfast when his phone rang. Mackie, we found them, the detective said. All 12. Warehouse in Louisville. Anonymous tip, let us write to them. They okay? Alive. Traumatized. But alive. Mackie paused. The tip came from an encrypted email. Untraceable. But it included detailed information about where the kids were, who was guarding them. Everything we needed for a clean raid. Sounds like good police work. Sounds like someone who knows how to work in shadows. Mackie's voice was careful. Hope Thayer was found dead this morning. Apparent suicide. Pills and alcohol. Left a note confessing to everything. Implicating Grant. Giving locations for hidden evidence. Keith said nothing. The thing is, Mackie continued. Her neighbors reported a man matching your description in the area 2 days ago. Driving a vehicle like yours. I was in Cookeville with my son. My mother can confirm. I'm sure she can. Mackie sighed. Keith, I'm not asking questions I don't want answers to. Those kids are safe. Grant's going to prison. The network's dismantled. But if there's anything you want to tell me. Nothing to tell, detective. I'm just a father trying to take care of his son. Right. Mackie was quiet. Well, for what it's worth, those kids you saved, they're getting help now. Real help. Therapy, safe homes, a chance. You did good. Keith ended the call. Looked at Garrett eating cereal at the kitchen table. He hadn't driven to Louisville. Hadn't gone anywhere near Hope Thayer. But he'd made a phone call. To someone he'd met in Iraq. Someone who owed him a favor. Someone who knew how to make problems disappear. The encrypted email to police? That was a different favor. From Pablo Skinner, who'd been paid the second half of his fee with very specific instructions. Sometimes the system needed help. Sometimes justice required stepping outside the lines. Keith Riggs wasn't proud of it. But he wasn't ashamed either. Because Garrett was laughing now. Playing. Sleeping through the night. And 12 children were free. That was enough. 6 months later, Keith stood in a courtroom as a judge finalized his full custody of Garrett. Charlotte was serving 18 months in a minimum security facility, eligible for parole in 9. She'd agreed not to contest custody in exchange for the lighter sentence. Terrence Grant's trial was ongoing. Federal prosecutors were seeking 40 years. Keith and Garrett had moved to Cookeville, into a small house near Keith's mother. Garrett was in therapy, doing better. Still had nightmares, still flinched at loud noises, but he smiled more. Laughed more. Keith had started working construction, using his GI Bill to take classes in social work. Figured if he was good at finding kids who needed help, he might as well make a career of it. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching fireflies, Garrett looked up at him. Dad? What happened to Hope? The lady from Safe Haven. Keith had known this question would come. He'd practiced the answer. She's gone. She can't hurt anyone anymore. Did you? I protected you. That's all you need to know. Garrett was quiet. Then, good. Keith pulled his son close. Watched the sunset paint the sky red and gold. He'd broken laws. Crossed lines. Done things that would haunt him. But he'd saved his son. Saved other children. And given the choice again, knowing the cost, Keith Riggs would do it all the same. Because that's what fathers did. They protected their children. No matter what. Even if it meant becoming the monster the monsters feared. And as the fireflies danced in the gathering dark, Keith Riggs allowed himself a small moment of peace. His son was safe. The bad men were gone. And tomorrow, they'd wake up and keep building a life worth living. That was victory enough. 1 year later, Keith got a phone call from Detective Mackey, now retired. Thought you'd want to know? Mackey said. Grant was sentenced this morning. 45 years, no parole. Judge called it the most comprehensive human trafficking case in Tennessee history. Good. There's more. Your name came up during victim impact statements. 17 kids. All of them said they were alive because you kicked down that barn door. Some of them want to meet you. Thank you. Keith thought about the girl from the cage, the boy who couldn't speak, the others he'd pulled from darkness. Tell them they don't owe me anything. Tell them to live good lives. That's thanks enough. I figured you'd say that. Mackey chuckled. You know, the FBI asked about Hope Thayer. About the evidence that appeared. About the anonymous tips. What did you tell them? That sometimes good police work involves luck. And I've always been lucky. Mackey paused. Take care of yourself, Keith. And that boy of yours. Always will. Keith ended the call. Looked out the window where Garrett was playing basketball with neighborhood kids. 12 years old now. Taller. Healthier. Whole. His son saw him watching, waved, smiled. Keith waved back. Thought about the darkness he'd touched. The lines he'd crossed. The man he'd become. And knew, without doubt, he'd do it all again. Because love didn't have limits. And fathers didn't stop. Not ever. Not until their children were safe. And Keith Riggs' son? He was safe. Finally, completely safe. That was all that mattered. Everything else was just details. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.